So, Ajoy, do you think Beatles in India got what they were seeking? You did mention earlier they did, but my question is, if you were the tour guide or a spiritual master, what would they have learned from or under your guidance? You are a big fanatic of Beatles, so something you would have offered had you been there.
As I was trying to point out, it was a two-way, relationship between India and the Beatles. Because, take me for instance. I belong to the Beatles generation, and it is very strange paradox that the Beatles had turned their back on their own commercial culture, and they were seeking ancient wisdom in a faraway country in the East. Whereas for us, the Beatles were symbols of modernity, and they were changing the way we looked at music, the way we looked at the West. After all, we were a part of a post-colonial generation, and we were ruled by the British, and we had a certain bad feeling about the British. There was, as somebody in the film says, there was a atmosphere of apology and inferiority complex. The Beatles came to India as humble young people, saying that it is Indian culture which is the greatest, and that is what they've come to learn. And I think the way they kept their hair, the way they let their hair down. I had my biggest fights with my father. He was an old school bureaucrat who worked with the British Raj, and he just felt that the Beatles were not Britishers at all. I think that in many ways it was a two-way process of learning. The Beatles were learning things, but we were also learning things from the Beatles, and we also learned to, I think, somehow respect our own culture. Often the westernized middle class of India, the elite, as it were, we all went to English medium schools. We tended to not really realize the tremendous richness of Indian culture, the sitar, Hindustani classical music. And it's really funny that when the Beatles came and talked about it, many of us really, sort of looked at it, with different eyes. And I think this bridge, which was built between East and West, if you look at the kind of pioneering thing, today the world is a very small place, and there is so much of interchange of culture between West and East that, you don't notice this difference. But if you really look back 50, 60 years ago, there was a huge gulf. And I think that is the thing, that is the sort of teaching. It's not just a question of seeking a mantra or seeking spiritual, happiness. Maybe the Beatles did not get that. There was no magic fix to their individual problems. They didn't feel much better coming to India. They did get that, 6 weeks or 8 weeks they spent at that ashram did make them feel better. All of them later said that was a time when they really calmed down and could think about themselves. But it's not what they learned just then. It is basically the question of trying to wrap their heads around another culture. And I think that really changed not just the Beatles, but a whole generation, and then after that, several generations of young Westerners who came to India, some of them as hippies, some of them as backpackers, but India, was rediscovered by the world, by the West.
True. So how do you direct a movie which is a documentary based on the historical chronicles, the footage which is in archives? Is there an angle that you introduced or discovered that gave a new narrative to your story? Perhaps some kind of a director's touch?
Well, I was very clear, right from the start, that I would like to understand and explore the larger perspective of what this relationship, this so-called love affair, which has endured over the decades. And I am very happy that it has come through, really, because I think that it is not just the music which we are talking about, and that is why there is not a single Beatles song in this film, because to buy one song of the Beatles from Apple will wipe out your entire budget of your documentary. So, I mean, that's the way, documentary budgets go. But I think that we've managed to tell the world, tell the oldies who loved the Beatles earlier, but also tell the younger generation across the world about that the Beatles are this unique phenomenon who are still talked about because of India. Because
Very
India,
true.
and I think it makes me very proud as an Indian to, say that, not just as some boast, but that India was a country which had immense cultural riches, immense spiritual strength, and that sustained and excited and thrilled these young, absolute mega rock stars. So I think that relationship is what I was trying to really explore, and that, as if you say, the director's touch, that is mine.
True. Very nice. Nikhil, what is your creative process like? How do you choose which projects to work on?
Most of the times I write my own stuff. So it's very rare that I get I think Betal that I did for Netflix and Blumhouse. I think that's the only thing that I had not written, and something came to me and I loved the material, so I did it. But otherwise I would typically write my own films, and it's most of the times a function of what I'm going through life at that particular point. It's in some way, I think you're always kind of seeking catharsis to whatever it is that is bothering you, and I think for me, telling stories is one way of achieving that. And then, of course, you apply a genre to it, and you practice. Sometimes you make a thriller, or sometimes you make a love story, or you make a family drama. But most of the times, it is about what you're feeling.
Let me cut you. You mentioned things that bother you. So living in your world, things surrounding you, what are the things that affect you and bother you, and then you want to take your paper and pen and start writing?
So many of them. If I start listing, I think in the morning. But I think it's not so much about things around me. I think it's things that are happening to you, and I think for me, the litmus test is that if something continues to bother me for more than 6 months, I think it's about time to kind of address it. Most of the times something will bother you, and like a couple of days later you'll not think about it. But if something it's like a pebble stuck in your shoe, right? It's just something that it's really annoying unless you have to take the shoe off and take the pebble out, till then it's going to keep irritating you. So it's one of those things. And I think I try to address those things through these stories and through these films.
So everything is bottled up inside you until you start writing. You don't tweet about them?
Sorry, I didn't get that.
I said you do not tweet about the issues that bother you. You'd rather keep
Oh,
everything
right.
bottled.
No, I avoid any kind of social media these days. I don't think it is the right time to tweet unless the only thing I tweet religiously is my Wordle score. I think that's what Twitter is best for right now.
Okay, great. Talk about the
Yeah.
technical aspects of your film in terms of cinematography, color palette, background score, sound design.
I think it's for the first time I'm not making a thriller. I'm associate. Uh, I'm known as a genre filmmaker. For me, it's almost like a first film because it's a very straight family drama. So I didn't do any of my usual trickery with the camera. It's fairly static and my brief to my entire team, like whether it's the music or whether it's sound, Belon Fonseca did the sound, or Amy Praful did the soundtrack. Shamim Kulkarni's first film as a DOP. So the brief to everybody was pretty much that we have to try and mimic the pace of a river. Like that is
Oh,
what I wanted the film to feel like.
wow.
The idea was that if you're sitting on the banks of the river, uh, the river is moving, but you don't really see it move. So that is what we were kind of going for in terms of pacing, in terms of mood. The color palette is pretty much a mix between blue and orange, and very speaking of the themes that the film tackles, whether it's religious or about life and death. I think it's fairly straight in terms of narrative, and it's a story about this family and how they make peace with the idea of death. I think that's what the film is about. So it's a fairly uh, delicately paced
Got it.
film. It's something that a typical Marathi film audience is not used to. But I think the response that we've gotten so far is very encouraging. So
Great.
I'm really keen on seeing what happens when the film releases commercially.
So, do you think the cinema from South is suddenly making Hindi films small or look like a dwarf? Between the competition or the PR strategies to dominate the pan India, where does regional cinema like Marathi films fit in?
Marathi films, I don't think fits in at all in that kind of gamut of pan India. I don't think we are pan India at all. We are very very small. We are like the Malayalam industry. I think we are telling more homegrown stories and more so the emotion is universal in our stories. So they reach out, but I think they reach out through OTTs and they're definitely not in the KGF or Pushpa, or if they're not in that league of commercial mainstream cinema when it comes to being dubbed and released in theaters and events. So I think we are still happy with what we are doing, whether it is bringing the film out. So my film will release all over India, but it's not going to be dubbed in like 5 languages. So that's not what we are aspiring to do anyway. So it's a small share of the market, but we are very happy with that.
Great.
As far as the Hindi cinema being dwarfed by the South films, I honestly don't. I just think it's a phase, and right now I think the public is in the mood for watching this kind of movies, and I think the public tastes constantly evolve. So I think all it takes is one good Hindi film to kind of
True.
set things back in motion. I think Lal Singh Chadda will be that.
Ah, yes.
We'll see.
Yes, something to look forward to. So, some memorable experiences from both your films that you would like to talk about before we end this? Ajoy, Nikhil.
Well, do you want me to go first?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Well, I'm particularly proud, when you're making a historical documentary, it's like a historical chronicle. It's as I pointed out, a very, very difficult task because you really are dependent on material which you are not creating yourself. You're dependent on a lot of material which you have to which is there, in archives. But also you're shooting and trying to make a film which is also live, not just a dead film, not just of dead photographs. So what we managed to do in this film, and I'm very proud of it, was that we got together two people. One old music shop owner of Dehradun,
Wow.
called Ajit Singh, who was first asked by George Harrison to play for his birthday and his wife's birthday at Rishikesh, and then he befriended both George and John, and he became, a wonderful sort of insight into what happened. And there is a photograph of Ajit Singh with this young Englishman who, straight out of school, had joined Doom School as a temporary teacher, a man called Nick Nugent, who turned out to be a good friend of mine because he later on became a very major BBC producer. And did radio, BBC Radio, of course, and I did many programs for him when I was doing stuff for the BBC. So we got Nick and Ajit Singh together.
How interesting.
And at the same place, in the ruins of the archery, for that photograph which still existed, and to dissolve that photograph with their modern photograph, both of them, of course, looking much older. Now that is a very proud moment for a documentary maker who is trying to recreate history. And so I think that that to me it is probably my sort of top moment of the film.
I would say that's a winner. I'm looking forward to seeing that moment, actually.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
How about you, Nikhil? Memorable experiences during the making of your film?
I think something that I will definitely cherish for the rest of my life is the opportunity to direct Mr. Vikram Gokhale.
Wow.
I think it is just phenomenal to work with an actor who has that kind of experience, who's worked with, I think, every filmmaker worth his salt in the country, and to be able to speak with him, to be able to learn from him, and to see him be so consistently in love with the craft, even after so many years, was very, very inspiring. I think if I can do even 20% of what he's doing today when I'm his age, I think I would consider myself extremely fortunate, because I think artists like this are rare, and to be able to collaborate with them.
True.
I think that's what you come to. That's why you're making films. And it's been like, just in this interview, I realized it's been 10 years of me doing this, and I think it's incredible. And to kind of speaking of cycles, I think for me to bring this film back to NYIFF, where my first film opened to the American audience, I think that's the beauty of filmmaking and I think life in general. So
true, very true. Suman, before we end this, talk about the lineup of short films that we have at the festival.
Sure. As with every year at the film festival, at the New York Indian Film Festival, our shorts programs are extremely popular. When we did it in person, we would see a lot of people come in for the 9 p.m. screening going on till the midnight. So thankfully, you don't have to stay up that late this time. It's virtual. We have them categorized into different themes online. And We also have a big selection of LGBTQ movies, short films also that people can watch. Everything is online at online.nyiff.us. This year, we collaborated on a new platform called Shift 72, which is industry-wide standard, taking care of film festivals around the world, such as Sundance and TIFF. And we're very happy to have that platform, which is looking very clean, polished, and easy for all of the audience to use and watch the films.
Great. So thank you so much for your time, guys. I wish you all the best for your films, and lovely talking to you. And we'll be watching your films in New York.